All right, in this third talk, I'm going to look at materialism and its toxic effect on children and what we need to start doing about it. I was very much alerted to this whole issue as a result of an American psychologist called Professor Tim Kasser. And over the last 20 years, he's done a lot of research and looked at other research done by people on materialism and its very negative effects on people. Now, by materialism, what he means is it's a set of values where what we pursue in life is money and what it can buy, appearance and image, and fame, popularity, status. Right? So a lot of this is about how you are seen through the eyes of other people. And what Kasser's work has shown, and other researchers as well, is the more we pursue these values in life, the worse our well-being is likely to be. And if you think that's not quite true, just think of the celebrities, because that is their life. And yet, for many of them, they have quite toxic lives, quite challenging lives. And for them to make a fist of their life, they often have to adopt children, become ambassadors, run a ranch, do other things to give their lives meaning, because these values are pretty empty. If you pursue these values, you have quite a meaningless life in lots of ways. So this is what Kasser is arguing. Now, to some extent, it's about balance. Of course, we're going to care about money because money is about resources. So it's about food on the table, it's about security. Everyone's going to care about money to some extent. Another thing is about what we look like. I mean, people have always cared what they look like. I think that's shown in archaeological digs that even thousands of years ago people were painting their face or wearing jewellery or whatever. And of course what you look like is linked to sexual attractiveness, so it is going to be important, and it's about social roles, it's about self-expression, all sorts of things involved in that. So we're always going to care about that. So I'm not saying we should be living some kind of hair shirt existence and wearing a sack, right? And equally, we're social beings. We're going to care about how we're seen by other people. That seems a kind of right and natural thing. But what seems to be happening now is these values are becoming so dominant that they're beginning to trump and squeeze out the other things in life that really do make life worth living. And by that, I'm thinking about meaning and purpose in life, which is about not yourself. It's not about those values. It's about doing things just because you find it interesting to do, because there's something about you that loves sewing or gardening or whatever. It's about being outdoors. It's about exercise. It's fundamentally about relationships. It's about having a sense of community. These are all the things that really matter for a good life. And the problem with materialism is it diverts our attention from that. So people would travel the world or pursue jobs where they maybe have to be away for a lot of the week because of money, and that's taking them away from their family. So there's a way in which materialist values will skew what people do in life, and that's the problem. Now, I just keep hearing about the stories from people about the extent to which these values are now becoming incredibly dominant. We ran an event as a centre not that long ago. There was a young lecturer from one of the colleges in Glasgow there, very attractive woman, well turned out in her mid-20s, and she said, I feel like I'm of a different generation from these young girls that I'm teaching. She said many of them are saying they take 3 hours in the morning to get ready to go to college. 3 hours. Just think what you could be doing with that time. I said to someone who's working in retail the other day about Glasgow. Glasgow sells itself on the basis of materialism, and it's now Scotland with style. And she corrected me and she said, no, she said, Glasgow's not about style, it's about brands. And she then went on to say, Glasgow's love affair with brands is such that when Hunter wellies, expensive wellies for those who don't know about this, came out for kids, there was a queue outside the shop to get them. And she's saying, are they not just what happened to the ones that have got eyes on them? or, you know, animals painted, and, you know, why do you need Gucci? Sorry, that's my next thing. Why do we need hunter wellies for kids? And then the other thing that she said was that all the rage in Glasgow at the moment is Gucci dummy tits, which cost £30, right? Now, this is the problem, I think, is that because a lot of people feel bad about themselves in lots of ways, feel they have to put on some kind of display, they're then trying to badge themselves with these kind of things that do nothing for their well-being or their family's well-being. And that is where we've got to with this. And no one is saying there's something not right about this. There's something fundamentally wrong with this set of values. And of course, they're coming from the media. They're coming from just about everywhere in life as well, politics as well. If we look at exposure to television, which is a major conduit for materialist values, you can see that Scotland is particularly prone because the average television viewing in Scotland is 5 hours a day. It's 4.5 in England, I think. This is kind of American proportions of television viewing, and a lot of it's commercial television in the west of Scotland. Now, there's a lot of research that says that there's a lot of issues with people watching a lot of telly. If you watch just a few programs a day, the chances are you think television's an asset in your life and you like it, and there are a lot of good things to watch. But the problem is that television makes people very apathetic. Even when people watch things that they've chosen to watch, their mood is often recorded as just below apathetic because it demands nothing of you. And I'm sure if you've sat all night watching the telly and you go to your bed, you will be aware of that feeling. It's a kind of empty, unchallenged sort of feeling. And when people live their lives like that, it can be very dissatisfying for them. Lack of exercise is also going to be an issue, lack of social contact. But the other big thing is about social comparison. It is a pretty natural thing for us to do, to compare ourselves with other people. Now, as a result of television and the media in general, we're being asked to compare ourselves with the rich and the famous, who don't even look like that anyway. Cindy Crawford said she didn't wake up in the morning looking like Cindy Crawford. And you can see why these kind of contrast effects are actually quite damaging for how people feel about themselves. And I think this is one of the reasons why there is a bit of an obsession about self-esteem, because that kind of media is quite damaging to how people feel about themselves and their partners. So the more you're exposed to that, the more critical you can be of your life, and the more you can feel like you're a loser or whatever because of all this comparison that's going on. Then add adverts into the mix, because the whole thing about adverts is it's about trying to sow the seeds of dissatisfaction in people's lives so that they will want different things. So I think that there's a major issue here that I think people are not adequately talking about. And I think it is linked to some of the loss of well-being statistics that we're seeing. But for young people in particular, they're exposed to screens for around 5 hours a day. I've read 7 hours more recently, often looking at various screens at the same time. Almost 90% of teenagers in the UK have a personal television, as does 60% of 5 to 6-year-olds, often in their own bedroom. In other words, that they can be watching it unsupervised and as they go to sleep at night. 2/3 of those between 7 and 16 have internet access from their bedrooms. And again, that is often unsupervised. Someone said to me recently that one of the most helpful things that someone had said to him about the internet is it's not a thing, it's a place. The internet is a place that your children are visiting unescorted a lot of the time. Would you let your child do that? Go to gambling dens and, strip parlors? You wouldn't allow them to do that. Well, effectively you are, because that's what the internet is for people. Agnes Niren, who I'm going to talk a bit about her research in a minute or two, points out that we used to think of children in the early years of life anyway as being under the influence of their parents and teachers and to some extent friends. That's just not true anymore. Children's time in front of a screen is more than double their time in class, and it's more than 1.5 times the time they spend with their parents. They are being greatly influenced by that whole commercial world, more so than their parents in many ways. I'm just going to take a couple of examples about the type of effect this is having on young people. For example, research found that 40% of teenage girls said that they've considered plastic surgery. Research published in the British Journal of Developmental Psychology found that 71% of 7-year-olds want to be thinner, and they think that they would be more popular if they were. Another study found that half of girls aged 14 say it's important to be attractive to boys. That's 50% higher than it had been 10 years before, and a very similar increase can be seen in boys. So this is all about the values of what you look like, how you're seen by other people, as becoming much, much more important in people's lives than it was when we were young. There's really, I think, we should be much more concerned about the very cynical way that companies and marketing experts are trying to target children and doing it very effectively as consumers. If you take something like the Disney Princess range, there are 26,000 products in that range. One educational psychologist puts it as, she said this: playing princess is not the issue is 26,000 products. When one thing is so dominant, then it's no longer a choice, it's a mandate, cannibalizing all other forms of play. There's the illusion of more choices around out there for girls, but if you look around, you'll see their choices are steadily narrowing. You know, there's other things like, you know, some companies that sell razors have a lot of internet games on their website. They're not selling to children at the moment, but they are seeing them as future market share. And that's what they're very cynically doing, is they're trying to get this brand loyalty so that in the future, when these kids shave or whatever, they'll be using their products. Pester power is what the advertising industry talks about, getting to kids as consumers, because they will influence the adults in their house and their spending power. And they're very aware that this is much more likely now because of indulgent parenting, where parents let their children make these kind of decisions for them. Now, I just want to finish this bit about the research by talking about a very, very important research project that was done by Agnes Niren. She's a Scot, who's a marketing professor, lives in Bath now, and she has undertaken a very important bit of research as a result of the fact that a previous UNICEF study found that children in the UK had the worst well-being out of 20 developed countries. You know, it was kind of scandalized a lot of people at the time. You know, worse well-being than a lot of poorer countries. Children in the UK had very poor well-being. And so this was a follow-up attempt to look at why it might be the case, and they particularly looked at materialism and inequality. But what I want to just describe is some of the research they did, because what they did was they took Sweden, which has got very, very high levels of child well-being, and a very equal country, and they looked at Spain, which does well in child well-being but is not as equal, and then Britain, which is a deeply, deeply unequal society with poor levels of child well-being. And what they did was they contrasted materialism and inequality in the three countries. Now, they also asked the kids across these three countries a very simple question, which is, what for you is a good day? What makes you happy, basically? And what they found was across the three countries, the kids were remarkably similar in what they said. They said it was largely about being outdoors, being with friends and family, and doing adventurous, creative, sporting activities. That's what turned them on. The only exception were poor kids in the UK who often gave quite materialistic answers about being bought things. But the big difference within their study was the differences in the parents and how they saw their parenting role. So in Sweden, they believe that their job is to turn out responsible citizens. And if you go into a Swede's house, they will have their cupboards arranged in the kitchen so that these young children can put the dishes away. They don't buy an awful lot for their children, maybe a good skiing jacket or a good pair of boots. And what they do buy for them, they have to look after. Right, there's an emphasis on looking after things. The other thing is both parents tend to be involved, even if they're split up, in bringing up children. And a lot of them are maybe not working a complete week. They're maybe working 4 days, or they work a shorter day so they can pick up children from school, because it's a very family-friendly society where work is crafted to some extent around family life. So that was the picture in Sweden. The picture in Britain was incredibly different. Agnes Niren talks about going into the houses of parents and families. You can hardly get in the door for the amount of stuff, a lot of broken, discarded items, parents believing that it was their job to provide materially for their children, to buy them branded goods, whether it was phones or other gadgets or trainers or clothes, because they didn't want their children to be excluded, left out or bullied. And the other picture that emerges is of parents quite exhausted in many ways, working long hours, often commuting considerable distances, who just didn't have the time or the energy, and to some extent they were buying off their kids by buying things for them. And they said the picture of kids sitting in a media bedsit with all that technology just wasn't evident in the other countries. It seems to be a particularly UK phenomenon. Now, I've spoken about this at a number of events, and I think that people really, really recognize that picture. And it's not just about materialism, it's the nature of our working lives as well, and the way in which these two things are now coming together. That is the problem. But I think that we do have to start talking about this, and we haven't really begun to do this yet. There's no encouragement from mainstream politicians to look at this, because they really want us out spending on the high street, and they're not giving us these messages that actually some of this is counterproductive and it is not a positive way for people to be living their life. What can you do as an individual parent? Well, I think you have to try and bring your children up with good values, lay the foundation of a good life with a healthy lifestyle as much as you can. That's going to bed at a reasonable time, exercise, playing outdoors, limiting screen time. These are all fundamental things. I think the other thing that parents have to do is look at yourself as a role model. Are you spending all your time watching the telly? Is that what you're communicating to your children that free time is about? Do you love brands? Is it a big part of your, hobbies is shopping? Is that what you're communicating to your kids? Because obviously that's going to be a fundamentally important thing as well. I think really to challenge materialism, we need to start banding together. I think it's quite difficult for individual parents to do something about it. But I think we need to start talking about this. We need parents groups in particular beginning to talk about it, because kids are playing their parents off to some extent, telling them, whether it's true or not, that other kids have got things and they're the only one that doesn't. I think it would be a really useful thing if parent groups can start talking about this. Now, I am very optimistic that change is possible, because most people agree with every word I've said. Most people know that there's something fundamentally wrong with the values that are the core of our society. And what we need to do is just start talking about this and acknowledging it, because do not minimize the power of conversations. We are very influenced by what other people are doing, saying, and thinking. And I just want to finish with a very inspiring quote from Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, who once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that ever has." Thank you.